Just in time for the New Year's, a fresh wave of fear mongering about AI is upon us. If you haven't heard about it, OpenAI, the people behind ChatGPT, have this new model that is like O3. It's called O3, and it's supposed to be like the doom. It's supposed to be the doom and final nail in the coffin for software developers. We heard this earlier in the year when we had ChatGPT 3.5 and then 4 and then O1 preview. And then you had Devin. Do you guys remember Devin? If you don't remember Devin, I did a show on that one. Devin was the AI computer programmer, software engineer that was going to replace us all. It turns out that Devin wasn't that good at doing a lot of pretty basic tasks. Now they're trying to sell Devin that works for like $8 an hour to non-technical CEOs or people that think they can replace software engineers to write complex code for them. We'll see how that all works out. I laugh about this stuff because I think it's kind of funny. But the thing I don't think is funny is how many programmers get turned off from this kind of information. People that are in college, or maybe you're considering switching careers, and you're hearing this stuff, you're like, well, why would I do this? You know, and if you didn't know, if you're looking for a career outside of tech, you may want to consider wind turbine technician. This is apparently the fastest growing job in America. And I don't say that to like downplay the importance of wind turbine technicians. I'm sure that's an incredibly important job. I'm just saying, this race to find the safest job or the one that AI can't touch, it's a losing game. It's the wrong attitude to have, in my opinion. If your job can be automated, it will be automated. And if software engineers' jobs can be automated, then lawyers can probably be automated. Then nurses can probably be automated. And then what do you have? Maybe manual labor that can't be automated, and maybe that skyrockets in the amount of money that people are willing to pay for manual labor type jobs or really skilled labor. That could be a future that we live in too. We don't know. Trying to predict the future is a little bit silly. And a lot of the hype and the fear around this OpenAI Model O3 seems a little premature, maybe a lot premature. I'm on a site called arcprize.org. And in fact, if you're interested in diving deeper into OpenAI or this particular model and why it may not be the thing that spells doom and the end of all programmers, go check out Theo Brown's channel. He does a really good dive on this as well. And also Primogen. He did a really excellent take on this as well. I'm kind of borrowing and I have a very different audience. And I thought it'd be at least interesting to see, what does this all mean? So there has been this push essentially to create something in AI that resembles how a human can kind of reason about. Like, I'm a human. I think you're a human if you're watching or listening to this. I hope you are. It'd be weird if you weren't. You're a human, I'm guessing, right? And so you have what's considered like general intelligence. You can pick up a skill, you can learn something, and then apply that newfound knowledge to something going forward. You can learn how to ride a bike and then ride a bike for your life. You can learn at 40 how to code and then maybe become a software engineer. What we've had in the past are these statistical models, which essentially take in some tokens. Your words get tokenized, broken down into sets of numbers and tokens, and something that a statistical model can understand. And then it tells you the most likely output from that token. That's essentially how these ChatGPT things work. Think like autocomplete on steroids, essentially, which is really cool. Like, we have GitHub Copilot. These are excellent, incredible tools. I use ChatGPT every day. I use Copilot every day. I don't plan on stopping using these things. I also don't see them as the end of all programmers. Now, where OpenAI and the previous models fell a little bit short is that they weren't really good at, or even approaching even, artificial general intelligence, right? They were trained on a set of data, and you're saying, hey, have you seen this thing? And it'd be great. Now, if you showed them something new that they hadn't seen before, or you had a novel problem or a very complex task which required multiple steps, they really tended to do very, very poorly at this. Now, I'm looking at a chart that's on a site called arcprize.org, and you can go to their OAI O3 pub breakthrough, basically find their OpenAI O3 breakthrough high score. And if you're watching this, you obviously see it. If you're listening to this, you may not see it. There's a chart which shows like the score basically that this organization has determined, which tells you like how close are you to reaching artificial general intelligence. And then we look at the cost per task. And we look at some of the models that you've used that you're pretty familiar with, like O1 Mini, or the GPTs like GPT-3, 4. They're somewhere in the very, very low range as far as like artificial general intelligence, and very, very low range as far as cost. Somewhere like in the 30 cents or way less than $1. It looks like around maybe 10 cents to 30 cents per task that they use. We see that O1 Preview moved fairly further along, not much. It got an increased score, so closer to artificial general intelligence, but the price actually skyrocketed compared to the previous models. It's over $1 per task. Then we move into O3, which is insanely high on the score. Apparently, it's when it's highly tuned. I guess when it means it has a lot of training data and it's been finely tuned and trained correctly, it can have an 88% what this place or this organization considers artificial general intelligence. This is wild, right? But the thing that people probably want to pay attention to that I'm sure the news is not going to pay as much attention to, the cost is absolutely insane. Over $1,000 per task. That alone should give us a clear sign here that this is not something in the near future that is going to be remarkably cheaper, right? So in this case, it's much cheaper, in fact, to hire a software developer or a doctor or a lawyer. Even you could probably hire a lawyer, teach them to code, and then have them still beat the cost for doing these tasks. $1,000+ per task. Now you get something that resembles more like how a human thinks, but is this really where we want to go as a society? I don't know. This is also brings together all sorts of ethical and moral dilemmas that I can imagine. But this idea, one, that a company could replace developers or just people in general, let's forget about developers, that it could replace people with an AGI like OpenAI API that just builds whatever. It looks like we're getting closer to that being a thing that might be possible, not to mention some other issues that arise. The fact that O1 Preview, one of the earlier models that I think this one is closer to, it tried to fool and basically lie to the researchers, people that were testing it. That's kind of scary. These models aren't trained to necessarily give you the most accurate information. They are trained to give you the most likely information. And apparently, they're also not trained to not lie. So they can hallucinate. If you've used AI at all, you know that hallucinations can occur basically when it will begin making up things and just kind of spitting out nonsense. And you can even encourage it to spit out nonsense. They don't give a lot of pushback either. There's been times I've corrected OpenAI when I'm using ChatGPT and I said, I don't think this is the way you should do this. Like, oh, you're right. I shouldn't have done it that way. I'm like, oh, really? Well, what the hell? Why would you do that then? And why am I correcting you? To me, it still seems very clear you need a human in the mix to write any programs beyond the trivial. So if you're in a coding boot camp, for example, this stuff probably does scare you because you're probably looking at this and like thinking, whoa, right? Like this thing can write what I write. Like I'm writing a weather app. This thing could easily make that. You're not going to be paid to write weather apps, first of all. You're not going to be paid to write single lines of code or even, multiple scripts. You're constructing typically complex programs, right? When it comes to what's the database going to look like? How are you going to create the tables for it? How are you going to create the API layer? How are you going to talk to design to understand what they want you to build? How are you going to talk to the legal team to understand all the different pieces of the puzzle that you need to make happen so that you're legally okay to be in the UK versus the US versus like Tennessee or whatever other state / country has certain laws. There's a lot of variables and different people to talk to. Even if you worked at a really small startup, I could see this maybe working if you had all the team involved and like giving prompts and suggestions to the AI agent or whatever to build and construct some website. But let's be honest here. Who's doing that? And how are they going to know if they're right or wrong, right? Is it, hey, I want you to write code that does this thing. How would they even know where to start? If you look at some of the prompts in the OpenAI demos that they've done, or even in the demos with like Devin, it's usually a programmer, somebody that knows how to write code for a living, asking it to do very specific tasks. For example, if you talk to a designer that never wrote code in their life, how do they translate their design into code? And then how do they tell it when it's wrong? Because it'll never be right on the first time. If you've ever used ChatGPT or any kind of AI tool to write lots of code, you know how often it's completely wrong. It gives you a great base point, a great starting point. And I'm going to do a YouTube video on like me constructing a fairly complex program to show you some of the pitfalls. And again, I'm not bashing on AI. It's amazing. I mean, I use it every day and I love using it. It makes my life a lot more enjoyable as a developer. But to just think that you could just give it to anybody and they could just make a program happen is wild fantasy. And we're coming up against some very hard hardware limits. We're not limited by software anymore. It's very clear that the hardware is going to be the bottleneck here. When you're talking about $20 per task and tasks taking 1.3 minutes, and that's using whatever semi-private means. I'm looking at their chart here. And we have other tasks that take up to 13 minutes. Wow. And the price can be as high as $17. The retail cost $2,000 for this one. The retail cost $6,000. I don't imagine how this would be like effective for any enterprise. So, one, we have a very, very expensive model. Two, we have some ethical and moral dilemmas, not just with what do humans do if this actually does replace them, but what do we do with the lying, which is why they've opened this up to researchers and people trying to basically make it more ethical and not lying, because that's a big deal. That's going to be really bad for their marketing and publicity when they try to sell something like this to anybody. And they say, well, how do we know it's not lying to us? You don't. I don't know. I guess you have to trust them and their researchers. And then having all this power consolidated in one company. Uh, I don't know how I see this playing out. I see this playing out very well for a few people that are at the top, and I see this playing out very poorly for a lot of people that are somewhere in the middle, right? I see companies that aren't very tech savvy getting taken totally advantage of. I see many people that are listening to this podcast potentially getting scared off. I see students in college hearing this kind of stuff and running away from the industry. And I don't think that's good. And I think that there's a lot of hype and a lot of people that read only the headline and don't dig even just a layer below the surface. I am not an AI expert. I am the furthest thing from it. But just reading some of these things, it's as obvious as day that this is not a replacement. And if it is, it's a much more expensive replacement for a human at this point. I don't exactly know the use case that is going to come out of this. But what can you do at this point? I think, and this is a reason why I partnered with Zubin, which I talked about in previous podcasts. I partnered with my buddy Zubin, and we have a program now that is like Parsity, same idea, teaching people not just how to code, but how to switch careers into tech, because we see that as increasingly more difficult and complex than just learning to code. Learning to code has always been difficult. It will continue to be difficult. Developers will be expected to do more. But how do you reinvent yourself? How do you apply to jobs? How do you pass technical interviews? How do you pass behavioral interviews? How do you even get an interview? A lot of people learn how to code and never even got an interview. So we're not teaching people how to pass an interview they didn't get yet, or how to learn how to code in a language and tech stack that they're not going to get hired for. We take a much different approach. And with the rise of AI and more tools that can do these trivial tasks and do more of what a super junior developer could do. And let me be clear, this is stuff that a super junior developer could do. It can do many of those same tasks. You don't want to become a super junior developer. That's not your goal, right? Your goal is to get in the industry and rise up and get around that senior level. I've done a podcast as well about why senior is really the sweet spot for most developers. It's where you'll spend the majority of your career, believe it or not. You may think that, oh, I just got to get in the industry and that's it. No. Once you get in, you're junior, you're mid-level. These are the shortest stages of your career. You're senior for a really long time. So knowing how to leverage these models, how to build complex software, how to talk the talk, walk the walk, how to become an insider from being an outsider. These are way more important things than tripping out about, AI stuff, even though it's fun to freak out about AI stuff, apparently, because we've done it, I don't know, 3 or 4 times this year. We freaked out about AI stuff, and I'm sure we're going to freak out about it a lot more in 2025. So I hope you're ready. Put your helmet on, because I can guarantee you all you're going to be reading about is how OpenAI and AGI are taking over. Get ready to hear AGI a whole lot more than you ever have in 2025. That's my prediction. But please don't let this stuff freak you out. Read a little bit, do a little due diligence, go past Twitter, go read an article or two, find different opposing opinions, and make your own opinion, because I just gave you mine. I'm not really worried yet. And by the time I am worried, I don't know, then we should all be worried, if that's any consolation. I always hope this kind of stuff is helpful, and I'll see you around.